You're listening to American Edition on the Voice of Russia. I'm Rob Sachs. This week, the UN-appointed Commission of Inquiry released a 131-page report detailing human rights abuses in Syria during its civil war. The conflict, which began in March of 2011, has taken the lives of an estimated 70,000 people. The report found abuses on both sides, though it mentioned that atrocities committed by anti-Assad fighters have not reached, quote, the intensity and scale of the government's violations. Here to talk more about the report is Amr Al-Azim. He is a professor of history at Shawnee State University. We're also joined by Zuhdi Jasser. He is president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and co-founder of Save Syria Now. Mr. Jasser is also author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Zuhdi Jasser, let's begin with you. What are your impressions of this report?
Well, I mean, as is typical for the UN, they keep filing reports and making statements with often little impact. I mean, it's about time that they finally said the Assad regime needs to be presented as war criminals. But I'm a bit upset that they're trying to make some moral equivalency between the opposition and the Assad regime's thugs that have been operating under shoot-to-kill orders and using a military machine that was funded by has been funded by Iran and Russia and armed by the Soviets for decades. And now they're trying to say that hundreds of thousands of opposition citizens that were initially trying to peacefully change their government and now have been forced to take up arms is somehow an equivalency. I'm not to say that the rebels are all angels. There's certainly some bands of terrorists in there, but that violence has been unleashed by the Assad regime. That has been Al-Qaeda's entrance, Al-Nusra, and all the other bands that the Assad regime claims that is the reason it is using violence were entered into Syria under the green light of the Assad regime. So to say somehow this UN report somehow gives an equivalency, I find to be offensive. And there are now over 70,000 dead. Some say 3 to 4 million homes destroyed. To say that is somehow due to the opposition is absurd. But I'm waiting for the day for the Assad regime to be tried in court for this, in the international court.
However, getting into some of the specifics of what the report said that the rebels have committed in terms of war crimes, they said murder, torture, hostage-taking, and using children under the age of 15 in hostilities. Clearly, those are things that, need to be recognized. What do you think should be done with those rebels who are acting in violation of human rights? Zuhdi Jasser.
Well, I think, that's a good question. Certainly they should be brought to justice. And if anything, the opposition themselves should take it upon themselves to stop that from happening. But they don't have the means to defend themselves against the Assad military machine, let alone deal with bands of radicals that have come in from all over the world to try to wreak havoc in Syria because of the chaos that the Assad regime has unleashed. So certainly the vast majority of opposition have been trying to stop these types of human rights abuses that have been committed by some of these militant Salafi or radical bands that exist. But I think it would be extremely inappropriate or unwise for your listeners to equate that to the opposition and the coalition that's been trying to bring about a moderate transition in a country now that is continuing to devolve into chaos.
Your reaction, Amr Al-Azim?
Well, I agree with what your other speakers said. Absolutely, but you have to put this initiative in the context of the wider sort of political activity that is going around. And right now, the international community is in this kind of balancing act of, on the one hand, trying to bring pressure on the Assad regime to basically essentially agree to moving forward and accepting some sort of political resolution that would essentially allow for the exiting of the Assad family and their main components of their regime, and allow for a more peaceful political transition here. And at the same time, the need to degrade the regime and pressure it into sort of breaking down to the point where it accepts such an outcome. waving the stick of international war crimes tribunals and so on and so forth is, I think, part of the repertoire. And the timing of the release of this report is not accidental. It is actually part of a context. You need to put it in context with everything else that's happening around. The shuttling back and forth currently by Brahimi and the Arab League, the movements by Lavrov, the recent statements, in fact, even yesterday by President Obama saying that he's now beginning to reconsider his position. I think this came out in the New York Times piece today, saying that he is planning to reconsider his position with regards to arming the rebels in Syria. All of these are part of a wider puzzle as part of this balancing act of needing to pressure the regime to accept the need for a politically sort of expedited outcome, and also at the same time ensuring that the opposition does not gain sufficient military success on the ground and traction to the point where they themselves will not enter into negotiations. Because remember, you've got to have two parties to negotiate a political settlement or a political outcome to this. And if one side seems to be doing better than the other, or let's say if the opposition does too well, then there will be no incentive for them to enter this political process. And particularly, this is very worrying if you consider the fact that you have now entities like Jabhat al-Nusra, and this is and the other radical Islamists and foreign jihadis there, and this is also in part a shot across their bows, saying to them that we want this to be a peaceful transition, and that does not mean that you guys will be part of this process. And I think that's partly why this was mentioned. I also fully agree with your speaker that there should be no equating between the actions of the regime and the actions of these few groups, but nevertheless, it is very important to begin to highlight these actions, and I believe that they should not be ignored. And within the opposition itself, and within SRC, that is the Syrian opposition coalition, we are already working towards putting together plans for transitional justice to give people an alternative to the sort of chaos and revenge taking that could become and is increasingly becoming prevalent. You want people to have an alternative. If people don't have an alternative to taking action in their own hands in terms of getting justice against people who have been oppressing them or who've committed atrocities against them, that is from the regime side, then there's nothing to stop them from doing that. If you start to put plans together, if you start to put strategies together and begin to have these strategies to be expressed and talked about and circulated amongst people, people will begin to see and understand that there are alternatives, and this will reduce this kind of problem.
Well, Zuhdi Jasser, a lot to unpack there, but wanted to get at this idea of, what foreign countries can do. There was debate today or this week at least, over what the European Union should do in terms of this arms embargo against Syria that's been in place for 3 months. Some are saying that it should be eased so that arms can flow toward the opposition. Others are saying that if you ease it, there's no way of ensuring that the regime will not get it. What are countries doing to aid the opposition to try to oust Assad without actually going in there and doing ground troops or having some type of outward military force?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, because that's really the elephant in the room, is that we need to do a lot more. You've got already a group called the Syria Support Group in the U.S. that has been given the opportunity to provide direct support to the Free Syria Army. They need a lot more means to do that. I think the sanctions against Syria have not been enough because they've been bypassed through Iran. If it wasn't for Iran and some from Russia, but if it wasn't for Iran alone, the Assad regime would not be around. And this is why when I hear people talk about some political solution, even the discussion of a political solution implies that somehow, we even had, as Amar was just saying, we even had the Iraqi prime minister recently saying that Assad was going to be around for another 2 years. Well, sure, he's going to be around another 2 years as long as he's able to pay his soldiers and his thugs that are destroying the country paychecks, and as long as they continue to have the economy. And there's even evidence that money has been shelved from Iran. There's been a number of Iranian soldiers that have been found as part of the dead in the fighting that's been happening in Syria. So sanctions not only should be against Syria, but the bypassing through Iran needs to be stopped immediately if the world would turn that attention to that. And I think other countries, whether it's Russia or China, that have been allowing certain bypasses to occur. But again, arming the rebels, it's not going to be clear 100% that you're always going to arm just the good guys. But at the end of the day, this is a violent conflict that is, as long as it continues, I mean, you can either say that you're going to have a short-term solution over the next few months where you arm the rebels fully and allow them to finish this, or you say that you're going to allow it to drag on, in which we've seen in the last 12 months the Syrian population, not only from foreign jihadis, they themselves have become more and more radicalized as a result of having no other options when they're getting pummeled and shelled in their homes and have nothing to eat or drink, electricity being cut off, etc. So they're going to become radicalized more and more. So we can either do a short-term solution by helping the rebels, shutting out the Assad regime completely, or this will go on forever and it'll devolve into an Afghanistan or Somalia.
I just want to ask Amr Al-Azam one more question. We just have about a minute left, but thinking about how to make sure that you can have a transition, but also showing the world community that Syria is ready to emerge and not have chaos, like some have said what happened in Libya. There's chaos now after you topple Gaddafi. How can you prove that Syria has a force in place to come in after Assad when you have a report like this that says there are atrocities on both sides? Doesn't that hurt the case?
Well, I think the best way to go about this is to develop and endorse plans like the TDA, like the Day After plan, that essentially addresses what a post-Assad Syria is going to be doing, what it's going to be looking for, and how it's going to be dealing with issues such as transitional justice, such as security reform, sector reform, such as rule of laws, such as electoral reform and so on and so forth. When you have these plans and they're ready and they're being circulated amongst people on the ground, and you start that narrative amongst people so that even before the regime falls, people are already talking about it, people are already engaging it, even as they are fighting where necessary to bring down the regime. The fact that such information is amongst them and is being circulated amongst the various groups and entities that are working on the ground amongst the people, then this is how you demonstrate to people that we are thinking about a post-Assad period, even as we try to bring down this regime as quickly as possible.
That's Amr Al-Azam. He is a professor of history at Shawnee State University. We're also joined by Zuhdi Jasser. He is president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.